Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Jeff Hainbuck, and I have the pleasure of being part of the Fair Chance Learning team now. You may have seen an announcement probably now 2 months ago. What is time really now that we're in COVID? Could have been yesterday. I was a former superintendent with the Toronto District School Board, and then most recently had an opportunity to work with We Charity with Mark and Craig Kielberger. And having a conversation with Martha and Dustin in January, looking for a new opportunity, I find myself now here as part of the team. So wanted to give my phone to my son for some reason. Oh, now, Noah, can you come get the phone? And when we were looking at topics for sharing and what we could potentially discuss in the staff room chat, the notion of creativity and really a discussion around creativity and what it means generally. How do you inspire creativity? How can you teach creativity? But then adding this other layer of creativity in a COVID response and remote learning, and what does that look like? And so we brainstormed and thought that we would invite some guests alongside to participate in a conversation with you. And just with the turnout, I would say today and the response, there's a lot of people that want to be here to have this conversation. I think it's very timely, great time before a long weekend to be talking about creativity. And just want to welcome you and thank you for being here. So we have a number of guests that are here alongside with us. And I'll just give everybody a chance to speak and introduce themselves. And then we'll begin with the first question. So I'll give you a chance to think about that. Really, how do you define creativity? What does creativity mean to you? What, when you say or when you speak of creativity, what is that notion? Is it something that's inherent? Are you born creative, or can we teach creativity? That whole nature nurture piece is of interest to me. So I thought we would start with beginning around a definition of creativity. Give you that as an advance opportunity. So if we could begin, we've got Stephen Reed here, we have Kyle Kitchen, we have Stacy Mulcahy, and we have Rob Polachecchio. And if we could just begin, we'll go in that order. Stephen, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself? And Martha, please feel free to co-moderate alongside and to help with the chat on the side. And Megan, you're there as well. And we also have some members. I see Dustin there in the back, and members from the Fair Chance team too. So if we could, Stephen, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself? Was Stephen the gentleman who was trying to get reconnected with his PC? Okay, well, yeah. we'll give Stephen.
Oh, hang on, I'm in.
Yeah, I see you.
You can see and hear me. Hey, yeah. So, wow, definition of creativity. That's a tough one. I think I have always what I believed was intrinsically creative. I built things and played with things and pulled things apart, and I remember going I remember going camping when I was a kid. And I was bored camping, like in the wilds of Scotland, which I'm sure you lot wouldn't be, but I was. And anyway, I used to go out into the woods in this little camping site, and I would get little sticks, tiny little, thousands and thousands of tiny little twigs. And I would build these complex villages with little houses and swings and things. And apparently this became a thing. And way back before the internet, someone started documenting these villages. And it was when I'd been on holiday. And then eventually one year they were walking their dog and saw me doing it. And they were like, "You're that kid that's been building these villages every year." And so there was this, and I, as a kid, that's just something I did. But when I got older, I started to appreciate that not everybody does that. Not everybody has that propensity for that. So to define creativity, I think, is just that freedom of expression, the ability to take that idea that you had in your head, like, oh, imagine there was a tiny village with little people that lived here under this tree root, and make it real, make it happen, which of course as we become adults we're able to do. I wouldn't necessarily say better, but we certainly have the money to put behind our ideas. We have the time, sometimes we have the time, we have the engineering skills to put behind those ideas, and it's less so much about play and it's more about structured creativity. But certainly I think I've always been creative, and I've always had ideas, visions and kind of ideas that I then just make real with the nearest material.
Thank you, Stephen.
Be that a twig or technology.
I love how you jumped right into your definition of creativity. Could you also introduce yourself to the group as well, and your role and why?
Who are you, Stephen?
Yeah,
what do you mean?
Stephen?
You mean there's people out there that don't know? Okay, so I'm joking, of course. So sorry. Yeah. So my name is Stephen Reid. I live in Scotland, and I have spent the last 20 years using technology to teach, from podcasting, animation, and filmmaking to 3D printing, virtual reality, games-based learning. And I say this very humbly, but I was part of the movement, the pioneering movement of games-based learning. I used Tomb Raider, the first Tomb Raider, 1996, and things like Command and Conquer Red Alert to teach history back when we still had the PlayStation 1. And of course, now it's become this movement with Minecraft and Microsoft and this sort of esports, and it's great to see that in action now these days. But yeah, so that's what I do. As of last week, no, 2 weeks ago, I joined Microsoft for the first time. So so that's been a big move career-wise for me.
Thank you, Stephen.
Congratulations, Stephen. That's awesome.
Congratulations. So the movement from a kind of a Lincoln log approach to camping and creating, and then applying that into taking that creativity and making it. It sounds like it's infused into what you do as a professional. So you've taken that creativity as a child and infused it into your learning as an adult. Absolutely, every day. And this is the thing, behind my work sits the concept of what I call the pedagogy of play. And I have this, I have a problem with the idea that we think that adults don't play or shouldn't play, or even at school. I mean, I don't know quite if you call it the same over there in North America, but we have this thing in the UK called playtime at school. And when the bell rings, it's playtime, which immediately, by the very use of the language, suggests that all other time is not playtime, and this 1 15-minute break is playtime. Even when you say to someone, if you make a joke with someone and you say, "Oh, I'm only kidding," the very nature of that word, I'm kidding, I'm being a child, not an adult in this moment. And it's like, why can't adults joke? Why can't adults have fun? You know, and I think there's something about our education system that kicks that out of us, or tries very hard to kick it out of us. There's a wonderful song by Supertramp called The Logical Song, if you're familiar with that tune, and it says it all. They wrote it back then, and there's just like, you know, we get to a point where it's time to be logical, and I just don't believe in that. I don't think that's necessarily true. I love that, and I just typed in the chat 1, 2, 3, 5. I think that was one of the lyrics from that album of The Logical Song. Yeah, thank you, Stephen, for your introduction and the story. I wonder if we could then proceed to Kyle. And Kyle, feel free to introduce yourself and begin to define what you think is a definition of creativity.
Well, so first off, thanks for putting me after the awesome Scotsman over there. No one's going to want to hear my Canadian accent living in America, but hey, well, I'll do my best. But I'm definitely on the same road as Stephen. You know, he's a great storyteller, and like mine kind of starts with the story as well. Is that, you know, I grew up in Vineland, which is it's the fruit belt of Niagara, and you know, we weren't hurting for money, but we never really had money, and so I definitely think I'm a maker at heart. And my big thing, sharing with my dad every 3 months back in the day, was we would watch WWF Main Event. And I had those hard 80s wrestling figures that I would throw in the pool, play with. And the wrestling ring for these guys was like $120 back in the 80s. And there's no way as a kid I was buying that. So what I did was, my dad is, I call him a maker. He has no idea what maker means, but he's one of those old school, will build it himself type guys. Mm-hmm. And so I built my own wrestling ring out of elastics, bolts, particle board, and created the WWF Main Event using my imagination. And it's also the time where we started to see things like Nintendo and gaming and stuff coming around. And like fast forward into my teaching career, I think I lost some of that creativity because and this is horrible because I don't know how many teachers are on here, but I focus on curriculum and I focus on delivering curriculum. I would honestly say it's only been in this role, and sorry, oh yeah, Kyle Kitchen. I work for the district school board in Niagara. I'm one of the IT for learning consultants, so we're kind of like ed tech for our 79 schools, K through 8. So even when I got this job as an ed tech person, I was delivering Google, I was delivering Microsoft, I was showing them kind of creative ways how to do stuff. And I lost that innateness of, I want to ask the question, what if? What could we make out of this? What do you want to make? It's very odd for an old man like myself to ask a student, what do you think? What do you want to make? What would you build? I have my idea, but what would you build? So creativity, I think, is intrinsic in all of us, but it's going to be different. I'm one of those people that say, oh yeah, if you pick up a guitar and play it for 8 months, you'll learn how to play. Nope, I can't. I am not musically inclined. Two hands don't work like this for me for some reason. Yeah. But in the last couple of years, I've given myself the freedom to play again. I love that you said that, Stephen, because I read Mitch Resnick's Coding as a Kindergarten Playground. Like, we lose that as adults, and it's unfortunate. And so in the last couple of years, I can't tell you why it happened, but I suddenly wanted to play again. I suddenly wanted to go into classes and say, all right, here's the curriculum. I know what I want you to learn, but what if we made something out of cardboard and just what could you do? All I have are 2 boxes. What could you make? And that kind of lit a flame under me in the way I teach. And I definitely consider myself a full-blown maker guy now again. As you can see, I've got, friends down in my maker space. But giving ourselves the ability to create is going to help motivate others. It's going to inspire others. Not obviously everything I've done has not been from my own brain. I've seen it somewhere. I'm like, ooh, what if? And then I try and motivate that in other people because I know for a fact we all are creative. I might play with cardboard stuff. Stephen, I learned from him. I learned Minecraft EDU right from the master himself. Like, we all have those specialty things that we can do and we can share. And I think that's what creativity is. It's a stem, it's a little seed that we can plant, and then whatever grows, we have no idea. That's gonna be based on the flower and the person that it is.
Wow, wonderful, Kyle, thank you. So talking about creativity as play leading to motivation, I love that. Okay, what about Stacy? On to Stacy Mulcahy from the Microsoft Garage. Where are you, Stacy?
Hi, everybody. I'm now in Seattle. I used to be in Vancouver, so that's how I'm a good friend of Fair Chance Learning.
Stacy, so good to see you.
I always like clapping and I like cheering. Cheering's good. It makes everyone feel good. So I work at Microsoft. I worked at Microsoft for 7 years. I've always worked in a creative field. And at Microsoft, I work at the Garage. In the Garage, we talk a lot about innovation and employee empowerment, and creativity is always put alongside of it. Creativity is such a weird word for me. It's almost a trigger word for me, frankly, because it can silo people, and I don't enjoy that. I think that you're a creative, especially in a tech industry, you're a creative or you're an engineer, right? Like you're 1 or you're 0, and that's so not true. When I think about creativity, I think about expression, and I think my whole life I've always just figured out how do I express what I want to express, and all of the things that I do that are tools that I use. And so code is a tool to express something, painting is a way to express something, writing words is a way to express something, making up stupid lyrics to a song is a way to express something. So that's kind of always been, I guess, my realm in that. And I guess my background a little bit is, I'm a person who I think creativity for me is motivated by something deeper than needing to express something. I think it's about proving that I can do it, and putting things out there and like engaging people. And so yeah, I 3D print, I code, I paint, I sew, I do everything makerish on the maker scale, and I do everything that I don't know. And so machine learning right now, which is like over my head. Like I don't want to go back to math school, but I embrace it because there's something I'm trying to achieve out of it as an output, as a way to express something. And so that's kind of how I look at creativity. In a way, I have a very polarizing relationship with that word, frankly. And so I'm kind of like, because the minute you say that, you have this image of what a creative person is. And as other people have expressed, I think that like everyone is creative, like problem solving. Some people solving problems, they come up with the awesomest solutions, and they're creative, but you probably wouldn't label them as, you know, being a creative person. So that's my spiel.
Thank you, Stacy. And you know, it seems you know the three presenters. I see this constant thread, or this thread of fun, right? This motivation, desire, and every one of you that as soon as you started talking about creativity and sharing your personal experience, just had this great smile across your face. Yeah. So you know that's also, you know, shows engagement. And you know, I was a teacher too, and you would look for those happy smiley faces to know that the lesson was going well, where you'd look into the other corner and you'd see disengagement because there was no emotional connection. So there is this smiling, fun, emotional response to creativity, I would say, is what I'm hearing from the three of you.
Well, I think
you've got Rob Polachecki on next from Apple, and I'm mindful of Rob's time. I know, Rob, you have another commitment at 2 o'clock. So before we open up to a larger conversation about what is creativity, and maybe even playing off some of the threads we've already heard, let's give Rob a chance to share his introduction and his understanding of creativity.
Sure. Hey everyone, Rob, lead the leadership and learning team here at Apple, which essentially is where there are educators with our tools or individuals who are looking to be creative. We're there to support. So essentially our team is coast to coast to coast, supporting educators nationally. Going back to the question at hand, for me, this is really around, as some have said, it's around problem solving, but I think it's really around the empathy of that problem solver. In other words, can they be sensitive to the problem and then use that as a vehicle by which they can create? I see creativity in that and the scientific process. Like, I know Edgar Torrance has written a lot on this as well, but that notion of how do you go through that process in terms of being resilient and not necessarily having an audience, but being able to construct, to try, to retry, just as I said, to paint, to do these things regardless of formal training or any kind of background. And so that notion of being able to test and retest, to be sensitive to the needs of others, and being able then to, again, to problem solve it, to become empathetic to what their problem is in the true sense of the word, and to create for that. Or perhaps it's a personal approach and you're going to create for yourself. All of that is absolutely true, and we see that again, just as some of the others have said, both in adults and kids, and agreed with some of the previous comments that it's for some reason it's lost along the way, or it's prioritized, if you know what I mean. Like creativity is it's Friday at 3:30, like just before the bell.
Oh, yeah.
Art. You know what I mean? Like that's our creative time. But then I teach for the rest of the week, right? And it's interesting to see the outliers, because to them it's similar to the Kyles and the others who are like, no, it's just what I do. It's just who I am. It's part of the fabric of my learning environment. So it's just interesting to see what that's like. As a question for the group, and one that we share often when we're in front of leaders, educators anywhere in the country, is the notion of not just creativity, because shameless plug, Apple has put together a whole bunch of resources called Everyone Can Create, like for everyone, but that notion of measurement. And we know that it's come up in TED Talks, but that notion of should you measure, could you measure? If so, what's the point of measuring creativity? And it's interesting because, again, Torrance has done work on this, others as well, to look at that notion of if one was being creative, is that something that in a culture of nothing measured, nothing matters, does that have to occur? Does that test that theory to be valid? So that's it for me. And I'll paste the.
Oh, you've muted, Rob.
You muted yourself, Rob.
Oh, I pasted the comment from Torrance there in terms of his definition of creativity. We'll usually leave that for educators to think about how they see that applying. And in other words, we won't tell them it's the definition of creativity from a researcher. We'll ask them, what do they think that means? And we get everything from the scientific process to, to learning. And we say, yes, exactly. Oh, and by the way, that's how Edgar Torrance uses that to define creativity. So the notion of it's more than just something you do Thursday mornings or on Rotary with Mr. Heimbach. It is always, it is part of the fabric of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Rob, for the plug that my classes were always creative. That's very true. And that's, you know,
I heard it was Thursday morning.
Yes, exactly.
at 10 o'clock only.
That's what
10 to 10:42, Jeff. 10 to 10. You had scheduled it appropriately. It was 10 to 10:42.
Yeah, that was recess.
Yeah.
So we've added this other layer now, I think, from Rob around, you know, measurement and risk taking, and the notion of being able to identify it, to replicate it through the testing and retesting. So I think what we're saying here is that there's value to respecting and responding to creating creative environments, that we see the value. And so want to leave that open now, maybe, and give Martha a chance to make some comments before we open up the group here, of the value of creativity and the importance of creativity. And to continue this thread, I'd like to then move into, you know, what, as a secondary question, so giving you advance notice, how do we encourage creativity if it's a given that we believe we all want, that we value it and that it is important in the classroom, given that teaching has changed dramatically now, so we're not able to be in the space. An actual 10:15 time to 10:45 may not exist. Everything is asynchronous, and so how do we continue to value and institute creativity? Even institute is maybe a word we don't want to use, given this future reality. So let's go back and talk about the value of creativity and maybe respond to some of the commentary that our guests have, and then move into COVID as probably the remainder of the conversation. And Rob, I'm mindful that at any minute you're going to pop off and be gone. And thank you for joining us, sir. We really appreciate your time, and have a great long weekend.
Yeah.
Full of creativity.
So I think
go ahead.
Why it's such an interesting concept for us from the organizational level is that, you know, we're working with educators and students in environments prior to COVID that was very diverse, right? And so how do you build relationships? How do you allow learning to unfold and uncover the learning moments? I think that our team has a approach of, okay, I wonder, I listen, I wonder, and I test. So the design thinking, right? Like, okay, what can we gather so that creativity comes into the design process? But then the reality is like, as a mom of 4 kids, we talk about the measurement side of things. And, you know, I know with each of my kids, if I give them a blank canvas, one of them's going to be like, well, what do I do now? The other one's going to be like, oh, sick, I can do whatever I want and it's not going to be graded. And the other one's going to be like, but I need to know what the rubric is, right? And the youngest is going to break it, which is all awesome. So I just think about, how do we create creative spaces in our living environment? And then the very important piece, that what does this look like where, you know, technology, they're sick of video conferences, they're sick of downloading and uploading assignments, like, and teachers are overwhelmed with what's the curriculum expectations? What is the bare minimum that I have to cover, and let me get that done. And then I'm going to be creative, to Rob's point, right? So I'm going to bear on through and then get to my Friday afternoon and say, okay, it's free time, go for it, sort of thing. So the guests, like your perspectives are amazing, and the risk taking is such an important component. Like I think creative people have no ego, to be honest with you. Like, you're out there taking risks, you've got no vanity. Like, sometimes shit happens and it looks ugly, and you just smile through it and be like, well, that's it, let's move on and recover and grow and learn. And so those are just some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Martha. So let's open it up to the group and give people a chance to participate. And if you're new to Teams, if you click on the kind of toggle your mouse into the middle of the screen, you'll see a chat function. I think it's the third box to the right. And there's a number of different questions and resources that are being posted there that you might find supplemental to the conversation. So feel free to use that space, but also use it to ask questions that Martha and I can use to add to the discussion. So,
and I think we should all get a dog like Stacy's. I can't, my yellow lab does not sit in my lap very comfortably. We need one of those dogs. Stacy, what's his name?
Berta, after Alberta.
nice.
Berta. Hi, Berta.
Okay, so the floor is open. Anybody want to jump in and give their sense of creativity and maybe address some of these questions? Who'd like to go next?
If I might, Stephen, I think I've always found that one of the clearest and easiest gateways to nurturing creativity is in problem solving, which I think we all kind of almost take for granted. And it's one of those things we say, oh, you know, it's great to have children problem solve, but I mean real world problem solving. Like as a species, we are designed to solve problems. That's what we do. Like that's we build civilizations. We figure out how to, you know, we saw birds one day and someone thought, I want to do that, and now we just fly and take it for granted. You know, we saw fish and thought, what's under there, and now we have submarines. We saw the moon and thought, I want to get on that, and we did. And as human beings, this is what we do. We're also destructive. You know, we see others over human history. We've seen other civilizations and thought, I want to knock that down. But if you apply that to something like Tetris, for example, one of the biggest, most successful selling computer games of all time, and people wonder why. But the psychology of something like Tetris was really simple. It asked us to build and put shapes together in a problematic sort of way. But here's the clever part about that. When we were successful and it gave us, and we managed to get rows on Tetris, it took it away from us. And it left us with our problems. It left us with the gap that we didn't put in. It left us with the little shape that we didn't quite have the right Tetris block for. And so we would try over and over and over and over again to fix it. And so that creative thing can be nurtured by simply presenting problems. And some of our biggest successes in the past have been quite literally saying, we built a model of South Africa in Minecraft, and it was called Small South Africa. And then we went down there and we said to the kids in South Africa, here's a model of your country. It has a township, it has a city, it has key architectural places like, you know, the prison that Nelson Mandela was in. It has a mine, it has a rural village, and it has a game reserve. Now, South Africa has problems. Go solve them using this as a model. And by the time we were finished with that short project, we had solutions for education for girls, clean water access, government policy and human rights. We had helping people to get education in the townships. We had conservation models. We had oil and gas solutions. It was just incredible. And that was because we just literally said, go find and solve problems. And it was incredible. We then modeled the same in Egypt and Scotland and China, and just give people the opportunity to solve a problem. And creativity is almost natural in that process.
Thank you, Stephen. Is there anyone else that would like to jump in and join?
I'll join in because I've been listening to Stephen and I hear what he's saying, and I do believe that empathy to the design process is the way to start a provocation. Now, ignore obviously the horrible accent. Forgive me, I am just doing this off the top. But when you give a student a provocation through empathy, the amazing creativity that they do bring. I've done sustainable work with the UN Sustainable Goals, and I had a teacher take a risk, and we created a city based on goal number 3. And that city lasted 3 months in her classroom. 3 months. It wasn't a worksheet that answered something. It was very, very simple. And the children could not wait to go back to their city to see what else she would add on to solve the problem. It could have been about the food. It could have been about the water. It could have been about where do we fit in? It could be just adding a mustache to something and asking a question. And things happen that are out of your control as a teacher. But as we embrace these, many students open up to the possibilities. And that is the key, that it is okay if you have a mind of a 5-year-old like LT Fossbottom does. Giving students a reason to become creative and solve problems is the greatest gift that we can give.
Yeah. And that links, that's fantastic.
Let's give Kyle a
cardboard.
Yeah, buddy, that was awesome.
So good.
I want to order one of those hats.
If you can create a way to not duct tape stuff to my face too, that would be amazing, because I can't get fake mustaches anywhere during COVID.
You could grow a real one.
I think a couple things I hear from Stephen and from Kyle is just the ability to create environments for students not only to thrive, but to really get inspired, to problem solve, to think big, to think that they can make a difference. And I know, Stacy, when we've been out to Vancouver, you've done that for your staff, and you've also done that for student groups coming in. Things like, and you're using things, everything from, I remember talking with school boards to say, go get your home ec materials out of those closets. These might be relevant. And the outcomes were drones. And the outcomes were crazy every time we got in there, and it was always different. But do you have any principles that kind of guide your process? Because I think what's happening today is, what we see here is educators are really the learning launch to creating these opportunities for students. And if we don't have that invitation as an educator to know when to think this way, know not to compartmentalize this in some way, that can be a barrier for students, and it is a skill set. So I don't know if you can comment on that, Stacy, if you have any like go-to strategies that you think about as you approach those environments for professionals and for students.
Yeah, I always pose a problem, always. Like at the end of the day, I have to engage employees to get them to take a risk, right? Like when we talk about play as a kid and we talk about play as an adult, it's two totally different things. And like this whole experience of embracing online has been amazing for this, because it's breaking down those barriers, it's making you more open to different approaches and different things. And so when I'm trying to kind of stoke some fires, get some people thinking differently, working together differently, I almost always pose a problem. And it can be wide-ended, but it can be like something that resonates for people, because if it resonates, a great example is someone mentioned, hey, like esports. We posed a problem about esports and like something related to here, and all of a sudden all these people across Microsoft who are super passionate about esports but probably know nothing about this are now super motivated. So for me, the number one thing is like figuring out what resonates with people and then putting them in a problem realm. And so another example of that is with all of the COVID stuff, as you can imagine, there are lots of problems to solve and lots of ways to innovate. And some of them super simple and some of them super complex. And people have been lit up all across Microsoft by some of the things we put out there, like, hey, someone came to us from the medical industry and they're looking for X, X, and X. And all of a sudden, people who know nothing about a technology are saying like, well, what about X? What about Y? And they're just trying to solve a problem. And it's not just engineers. It's people from finance. It's people from legal. They're related on a topic area or a theme that resonates to them. And you're giving them something to consider rather than blue sky thinking. Because creativity often is, oh, blue sky, like if you could do anything and had all the resources. But actually, by putting in parameters for people and giving them restrictions on what they kind of need to work within, I found for me has been the most successful for all types of learners, as Martha kind of like outlined, that like people approach different things and they need different ways to kind of understand what the ask is. But by giving really like small parameters. One of the things we used to do with designers, by the way, in the industry, or I did, and they hated me for it. I had a great designer friend, but he was stuck in a rut. He just kept doing the same thing. So he was churning out work and not being creative. So I went to his computer, I removed all of his fonts except for 2 fonts. He hated me for it. And then he did his next comp with that because it was such a restrictive parameter that he needed to use, and he needed to figure out, how can I make this work? How can I make something new? How can I, iterate on what I've done? And so he's like, oh, I hate you. But he turned out something awesome and then just adapted what he wanted in that sense. So I always think about those things when students come into the space. It's not, this is a whole wide world. It's like, this is a problem we're trying to solve, and making it at least on a theme or a vertical that it can resonate with people personally. And we had someone talk about empathy, and I think that's the key. Like, if you're empathetic about it, you have a point of view about it, you're already halfway there, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And sorry to jump in again, Jeff. I'm just going to go down a path a little bit. For Stephen and Kyle, like when we think about collaborative creativity and you think about doing this in a virtual setting, what comes to mind in terms of teeing up these opportunities for students? Because I think we hear asynchronous, we hear some synchronous, we hear whether we can access learning or not. But if we had to think about, I would say we've seen amazing things when it's collaborative problem solving or collaborative creativity. So how can you empower that with children?
Kyle, after you.
All right. Oh, did you say pass to me? So this is really an interesting question, really like right on the money for me, because my role was to get my district online, we send out links, we have the Learn from Home in Ontario, all those things to help students to connect with teachers. And of no fault of anyone's, this is like, obviously it's called like emergency pandemic. No one was prepared for this. Like, I think we all know, like, blended instruction is not me teaching you the way I would normally teach. And that's really hard, and it's not something we can just turn on and off. So we're learning that. So when we get to the creativity, especially right now, because like, I don't know what's like where everyone else is, but in Southern Ontario and, upper New York, it snowed a couple days ago. So the sun is now starting to come out, and it's interesting because I think, wow, so this is my fight now. It's not COVID, it's the sun. Because how am I going to engage creativity when that sun is sitting out there? Because I want to go out there too, I won't lie. But so posting, like I said, the provocations and making it purposeful. I'm not going to give you an idea just because I need to meet this math curriculum. I'm going to give you an idea that you're going to work through, and you're going to experience the curriculum without you even knowing it. So as I said, like, because I really think of myself as a maker, and that's why I did the LT Fosbottom, was to issue a challenge to kids who are experiencing burnout. That was my empathy, that these kids can show you so much creativity and show you curriculum through building something. So it's just not like, and wherever people are, and maybe we're talking about angles in math. Well, I could share you a virtual worksheet, send it through Microsoft, Google, whatever you use. Or I can have you go to your house and I want you to find me angles. I want you to construct me something out of this. I want you to build me a house first. And then we're going to talk about angles and go see how many angles you have on there. So the constructing piece and the engagement piece now more than ever, I feel, needs to come first. And like Stacy said too, like, we're innately channeling what we're giving them and what they are going to use. Like for me, it's a recycled challenge, obviously. I don't want people to go to the stores or anything right now and buy stuff. So, the whole engagement piece is going to be key more than ever right now, because we're going to lose our guys if we just keep, here's a link, here's a link, here's a worksheet. So we have the opportunity now that everyone's online to actually get back to the grassroots and let them be creative, because you know what? Record it, send it to me. We'll talk about it. I'll give you feedback, and let's talk about the creativity more so than that check they did it.
I even think the creativity in, like, I mean, we talk about upload and download, but the creativity in and the play in video calls. Like, honestly, who isn't sick of video calls, sitting at your desk doing video call after video call after video call, right? So it's like, we need that sense of play within this new experience and platform and connection to be productive and to make a difference. And what is amazing is it comes back to me for Stacy's comment when you were talking. Kyle, she's like, use a VR app to overlay the angles. And I remember so clearly Stacy talking about, you want that +1, like you want to present an idea and then you want somebody to +1 it. And within, you know, this type of exchange, that's so important. And what I also think is really cool is Wendy talking about how the design thinking process and the environmental conditions for learning that she set in place in September has allowed the conditions and the learning to continue into a post-COVID learning scenario. So, you know, if and when we get the chance to come back into classrooms and schools from the district level to the admin level to the educator level, are we going to be taking the time to set the conditions for a really immersive experience that allows for play, empathy, creativity to be built so it can carry through whatever this post-COVID learning experience will develop into? I think that those are, you know, things that I was thinking about.
Sure.
Thank you, Martha. And I wanted to also include Corinne on the call here and maybe get her perspective. Corinne, maybe you could introduce yourself, but Corinne teaches in the post-secondary space. And so we're talking about, you know, learning and creativity at elementary level and at the younger ages, and really curious to know your perspective in post-secondary and how you infuse creativity in your teaching and learning.
Absolutely. I'm Corinne Hoisington. I am in Virginia. I'm a professor there. And I have to tell you, a lot of times by the time they get to these older grades and into adulthood, they've kind of lost their sense of play, and they're so used to the rigidness of school and what it's about that they really get disconnected very quickly. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, creativity stops when frustration rises. So when they meet those walls, they lose that sense of play. So I really think what I try to infuse in my class is not that singletary answer to really give that empowerment back to the student to say, how do you want to solve this problem? Not saying, okay, answer A, B, C, or D. And if we don't recognize that in a remote environment, then we're in huge trouble, because you can Google anything. I can open another tab right now. You ask me a question, I'm in. So how can I get that learner to really think outside that box, have that creative response, solve it with the tool set that they want to use to really empower that creativity in them? So, and that really gets them to think, it gets them off their computer, it takes that inner peace. And something that we're working on, that I'm having the honor working on, is we're now creating a remote learning certification, and we're calling it the Phygital Learner. The term Phygital Learner is newly coined. It kind of means that physical learner that we're used to having face-to-face, and now the digital world that they're thrown into. Soon learning is just learning. And we want a Phygital class. That means this fall, we don't know what it's going to look like, but if we're Phygitally ready, we'll be ready with the best creative response that's possible. Learning is learning. It doesn't have to be face-to-face.
Yeah.
Thank you, Corinne. I wonder if I could add some commentary in my role when I was superintendent of education, and I would have an opportunity to visit a lot of schools, and I was an elementary teacher and principal, and I was always taken as I would visit secondary learning spaces that the schools that tended to do the best on whatever measurement that was, whether it was report cards or had the best reputations, were in contrast to my understanding of creative learning spaces. These were classrooms where the desks were often still in rows. It looked like a classroom space that I attended when I was a secondary student myself. And because so what I've begun to wonder is maybe we've been measuring success at the secondary level without including creativity. We're looking at, you know, whatever grade point is or graduation expectations, where I would visit those secondary places and they were often quiet. We would use the notion of happy, busy, good. The students were wonderfully sitting in their seats all by themselves, not talking to the student beside them or bothering the teacher, and banging out 80s and 90s and 100s, and off they would go to post-secondary. But I think what always troubled me was I saw a loss of this creativity, a loss of expression, of desire to learn. It was desire to meet the expectations that would get them to graduation. So that is what's always troubling for me as a superintendent.
And I think, sorry, if I could just add to that. I think that comes.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go, Stephen.
No.
Go. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think everything that we're sort of talking about is encompassed in a much wider. We can talk about this in the edu sphere, but it's actually a much wider social sphere that has been dripping for decades, to the point where, you know, just to pay the mortgage, we have 2-parent working families who end up paying a nanny to look after the kids because they have to go to work to pay their mortgage. And it's because we demand this of our society, because, you know, the cost of living is so high, and we're sandwiching people into, you know, some people in the UK will often say, oh, you know, the class wars are dead. They're not at all. There's still lower working class. There's still middle class, which is, you know, being squeezed. And there's still definitively and absolutely the upper class. And call it what you like, but it's about squashing people to the point where socially we can't play anymore. Socially, we don't even have time for our kids anymore because we have to go to work. And, you know, we finish at 7 o'clock at night and we have to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it's as quick as we can feed the kids and ship them to bed before we can get them out again. And this is a social issue, not just in Western society, not just in Britain or America, but across Europe. It's happening in Africa. It's happening in the Middle East. And our cultures, even if you take the sort of the southern Mediterranean cultures of Italy and Spain, which were very family and child orientated, and they would have siestas in the afternoon, that's dying now because we don't have time, because we have pressure in society that tells us that we need to be bigger, better, faster, easier, more. If our GDP hasn't grown by 3%, we have failed. And I think that's putting a tremendous amount of pressure on our people to be creative. Where it's functionality. Let's be functional. And I think if you read, for anybody who's watching this, if you haven't read Jane McGonigal's Reality is Broken, pick that book up. It's a phenomenal book about why we play, and why we've done it as a species. You know, whether it was dice or cards, or whether it was gladiatorial arenas in ancient Rome. We play when our reality is broken. And if anything, our reality is broken right now. And we need to be playing, and we need to be encouraging our children to play, rather than this, like you said, this university focused, if you don't get a degree, you've failed kind of aspect. I'm really quite passionate about that, as you might be able to tell, but I think we're failing. We're not just failing as we're not just failing as education, though, as an education system. We're failing as a society, I think. And you know what? It's easy just to go back to the television and watch the next, you know, Love Island or America's Got Talent, because hey, that's easy. Right? And that's what they do. They feed you the advertising, they feed you the television programs. I think it was George Orwell said, you know, give them alcohol, tobacco, and let them gamble, and they will be ours forever. And it's true. It's just, you know, give the masses what they want, and they'll keep quiet, and they'll be functional for us. And I think COVID, if nothing else, when we come out the other side of this, we have to recognize that and rebel against it.
I love when Stephen, and this always gets there, Stephen, when you jump on that soapbox, and
the
real connections are amazing. I think the provocations that you challenge students and using the canvas, whether it is Minecraft or whatever canvas you choose, always invites wicked opportunities for students to learn. I want to change gears a little bit to say, so one of the motivations or celebratory moments, like Stacy, when you say the +1, that's a resonating statement that's landed with Martha and I know whenever we heard that 3, 4, 5 years ago. But the idea that you always leave work samples out for students to see the potential of maybe what they could do. And if we only invite provocations without giving some kind of exemplar, some kind of, like, whether that's celebrating with those people or if it's celebrating past notions, like how, and Kyle, I can see in your background there, you've definitely, like, that's not a filter, is it?
That's his basement.
Yeah. like just how do we, like, those are invitations, I think, and those are environmental invitations as leaders that you can offer in modeling. How does that fit in this context in terms of when we think about creativity and in your roles there?
Do you want to go? I mean, for us, it's shifted a little bit. We always, I believe in transparency. And so what we're seeing, for example, in Kyle's background to me is transparency, like transparency into like what he's interested in, what he's doing, things that he's made, artifacts of those things. I think it's important to have that because I sometimes feel like our jobs are to be not necessarily leaders, but curators of what's possible. And like, if you kind of know what's possible, it's a great jumping point rather than a blank canvas for some people. And for some people, they need the blank canvas. You know, it's shifted for us really weirdly in some ways because we, like everyone else, we're all together, we're doing things together, things are very hands-on, very learning. I've actually shifted that so that we're being transparent in what we're doing and making and having people join along with us. It sounds really weird, but I guess the best example of that is I run a stream right now where, like a gamer, except for I'm a maker. And it's just like follow along my thought process as I'm trying to debunk a problem or something that I'm making, and people are chiming in. Have you tried this? Have you done this? And it's super weird for me because like I don't really want to put myself on display that way, but I'm engaging people in a different way, and it's been really interesting. Like people have been, oh, you know, the problem that you're having is this, and you need to go this, or like, hey, if you're doing this, there's 4 ways to do this, and suddenly the collaboration and the conversation has been interesting. And by doing that, that I'm doing the transparency of people can see those items. And I call it making in the open, or just like being transparent about what you're doing. And other people have joined alongside of me. So other people are like, oh, you know, so I can open up a program and it's okay that I don't know what I'm doing and that I can have people help me learn what I'm doing, but also we can kind of collaborate, work on something together because someone will pitch an idea that's super awesome and you'll be like, oh God, yeah, I got to add that. That's going to tweak that. So that's just like a really tangible, weird way that I think I've manifested that in that way because it's really hard to do. But I think it's got to be like, how do you open up, you know, how do you create those glass doors with people so that they feel like they can contribute and collaborate along with you and vice versa?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm grinning the whole time I'm listening to you, Stacey. I want to follow your stream now. Wow, thank you. I'm mindful of the time now too as well, and I want to give Martha a chance for her comments and maybe closing comments.
It went too quickly. That's my closing comment. It certainly needs to be a continued conversation because I think that the transparency piece is so critical. And you know, there's this concept of following along, but then there's this concept of like participation, like being part of the learning process and the environment and that the power of co-learning, right? Like to invite somebody to learn alongside and watch your thought process and suggest. I think that is so powerful for our students if we can model that for them and with them, then you know they are going to be empathetic and be able to bring in these the thinking that's required for us to solve some of these deep wounds that we have to Stephen's point, right? Like there is an opportunity for us to step into a learning that's more humane, going back to Gary Steger, like a more humane learning experience for our education system. And then starts with the educators that need the confidence and the risk taking and the modeling to say, this is okay. Like, this is okay that you're interested and you want to give better, deeper, more humane learning opportunities. I think the guests who are with us are just incredible. Thank you for sharing your time. And we could certainly continue. I think it would be amazing to have a follow-up conversation because how do we encourage? And I think we will take some of these concepts that you presented to us and trying to build them in. But these staff chats are exactly that, right? Like, we're not perfect. We just, these are our wonderings. We're making our thinking visible. We're inviting these conversations that are keeping us up at night. And so we'd want to have you back, obviously, to see what you're learning along the way. But thank you for taking your time because I know how incredibly busy you are.